Hey everyone, Steph here with thegoodride.com. In this video, we're going to be checking out my personal favorite powder boards, Freeride boards, and alternative Freeride boards. And I think the reason why they're all my favorites is because they're so different from each other. They each have their own kind of personality and their own way that they like to explore the mountain. And these are in no particular order. They are just a compilation of my favorite boards in these categories. So you can also check out the full reviews of any of these snowboards at thegoodride.com and like and subscribe to help us thrive. Thanks for watching. We're going to start with the powder boards. So we're going to start off with the Jones Mind Expander, which is a powder specific board. This board has a pretty aggressive rocker profile, and it has this huge nose on it that is really hard to sink in powder. So this board floats without really trying too hard. It turns really quickly, and it kind of has that maneuvery feel that you get from the rocker board where you're just kind of like pivoting on top of the snow. My first run I took on this board, I instantly loved it. It wasn't even a powder day, it was just, well, it was actually a pretty awesome wind buff day. This board was super fun on smooth snow and just kind of cruising through. It does have some side cut disruption, so I was able to hold a pretty good edge on harder snow, and that's what made that day really fun for me. So not only is it good in deep snow, but it also is a lot of fun on some nice groomers or some good wind buff or whatever. But it does give you just kind of a little bit of a different look to the mountain. It has this really fun personality, and at the same time it's fun and playful, but also it kind of gives you this extra confidence to kind of charge around and find all these little hidden things that maybe you wouldn't have looked at before. Alright, next up is the Yes 420. This board is meant to size down. It has a super wide waist width. It's got a lot of surface area on the snow, and that's what gets you to float with this board. So this little board loves to make a bunch of turns. I mean, I was just inspired to kind of like play around on groomers and stuff. You know, I'm spinning that board around in circles because it's got the reverse camber and it's like no catch. But it does have a little bit of camber in between the feet, like very, very slight. So you do have a tiny bit more control than you would from a full reverse camber board. But this board is so fun just to spin in circles down a groomer or play around and do like these weird little butters on it on the nose. It's really quick to turn even though it has a wider waist width. It's just, you can feel like the board is a little bit smaller, and because of the reverse camber, you're also on like harder snow. You're not really touching the snow a lot. You're kind of like only touching it with that middle zone in between the feet. So it feels a lot smaller than it is, and it's small to begin with, so it's super maneuverable. But when you get it in soft snow and deep powder, it really does float well, and I felt like I wanted to make a bunch of like crazy little turns in the powder, but I didn't lose my speed with it. It still was able to float. And I had a lot of fun in this on trees and off-piste because it is so much smaller than like if you went to a traditional powder board size and sized up and had a bigger board. This board is small and it's maneuverable and it's super fun to ride through trees. So if you're looking for one of those short, fat boards, then maybe the Yes 420 could be fun. Me and Paige had a lot of fun on this on our little mini powder day that we got. Just, you know, really fun, inspiring board. So onto our Freeride board in the list. It is the Jones Flagship. This board it's tapered, it's directional, it's got camber in between the feet and rocker on the nose and the tail. For me, I felt like the Flagship liked to ride fast and carve big turns on your normal day. And then on a powder day, it really charges through powder really well. So this board is great for the first runs of the day. You get up there, you get first chair, you're cruising, the snow is smooth and soft, and you don't have a lot of bumps. You can really charge hard on this board. It is great for that first half of the day when it's not all chopped up and chewed up yet. Once the snow kind of gets chewed up and bumped out, then it's not the most fun. So that's when you want to switch to a different board that can kind of handle those bumps a little better. But on those days where you just get that perfect condition, or if you're up there before everybody else when the groomers are fresh, this board is awesome. It's super fun. It is direct and to the point, I feel, the personality. You know, it wants to get down to business, it wants to get stuff done, and it can charge hard when you want it to. So that is the Jones Flagship. All right, next up are some alternative Freeride boards. First one we're going to check out, because we just talked about the Jones Flagship, is the Jones Hovercraft. This board is a little bit different than the Flagship. So the Hovercraft is that alternative Freeride board that you cannot sink in powder. Like, one time it was a pretty deep powder day, and I was like, okay, this thing, I'm going to try to sink it. I'm going to do what I can to see if I can get stuck. I went to this forest that was super low pitch to it, so it wasn't steep and no tracks at all. And I was just like, okay, here we go. And I didn't try, I didn't pump through it. I just kind of stood there on the board and did absolutely nothing. And I wasn't even going that fast either. And the board just went, it just kept going. Like, couldn't sink it. I tried. Unless I stopped completely, but it just kept charging through and it was awesome. And that's what really won me over on this Hovercraft. It just keeps cruising. So Hovercraft is definitely, I feel like, a very fitting name for this board. So the Jones Hovercraft has camber in between the feet, rocker on the nose and tail. It's got a super stiff flex. It has a bigger nose. It's kind of a larger board size. You can really feel that this board is like, it's very solid when you're riding it. I feel like it's super damp. It does feel like you're just kind of like hovering over everything. So it's a really damp ride. It is also, though, the cool part about this board is it's not just a powder board. It can charge through trees or it can ride through bumps. It keeps itself together better than the Jones Flagship for bumpy and off-piste riding. And it can also carve really well. So that's a look at the Jones Hovercraft. Okay, next up in the alternative Freeride boards is the Endeavor Archetype. This board is unique in that it is not going to ride how you think it will. If you look at it and you just kind of like assume by its looks how it's going to ride, you're totally wrong. This board has a crazy looking swallowtail on it. It is directional, and it has a directional camber, so the camber is set back a little bit. But this board, when you're riding it on groomers, feels like you're riding an all-mountain board. For me, it felt like I was riding an all-mountain twin. I didn't really notice the swallowtail. It has positive camber, so you're very connected to the snow, and it has a ton of energy in it. Super fun, I felt like, to carve, because it has so much stored energy in that camber. There's quite a bit of an arc on it. So I had a lot of fun carving on this, and the pop was so good. If you like that positive camber feel to a board, you want to feel connected to the snow, this board is great for that. But it's also quick to turn. It's more of a technical ride, I feel like. Not super easy to turn if you're like a beginner or an intermediate. It's going to be a lot of a board. But if you have a little bit of technical riding skills under your belt, then this board is super fun. And while it can do all those things all mountain, it has a decent float and powder, so it's got a different feel than like a rocker board. This board has the positive camber, which keeps you feeling very grounded when you're riding powder, but it has that nose on it and the swallowtail that kind of allow it to maneuver quite easily through deeper snow. So it can float in powder. It's super fun to carve. It has a lot of energy, and it kind of keeps that energy throughout all of those conditions. And that's why I really like this board. It's a little bit of surprise, and it's not what you think it's going to be. So that is the Endeavor Archetype. Okay, last but definitely not least in the alternative freeride category is the Gentemstick Mermaid. This board is as directional as you get. It's got a super directional ride, huge nose, but it's not super fat. It's actually kind of like a thinner profile. The nose is really huge and it's pretty tapered. So it comes down into that little bit of a swallowtail or mermaid tail, if you want to call it that. And this board is a little different where it's kind of like slowing down the mountain for you somehow. Somehow it just kind of slows things down, but you're still able to kind of like make turns and kind of pop in and out of them and go check stuff out. But its personality kind of inspired me to slow down and like really explore different areas of the mountain instead of just charging down the groomer. And I think that's why I liked it, because I love being able to go off on little tangents down the groomer or through the mountain or in the trees and like check stuff out. And this board did that without being boring. It has what Gentemstick calls acceleration camber. So it has the camber back there that's kind of set back. And when you load the board and the camber, it actually lifts the nose out of the snow. So at some points, the board didn't feel like it was this big old board. It actually felt smaller to me. And because you're able to load the camber like that, I feel like there's a lot of good energy out of turns too. So really fun to carve. It's set up differently where it's recommended that you set it up posy, or at least close to that. So you get to kind of explore that too, which I don't get to do a lot. So that was really fun. The Gentemstick Mermaid is just carefree. It's turny, but in like a really cool slow motion way, and you're just kind of like flowing with it. So it kind of helps you enjoy the mountain in a little slightly different way. So that's a look at the Mermaid from Gentemstick. All right, there you go. There's a look at my personal favorite powder boards, Freeride boards, and alternative Freeride boards.